I call this the second most powerful tube in the world because I am sure there are some tubes on the market that are more powerful than these KT170. After a quick search on the internet, I found this. Cayin Soul KT170. The tubes are capable of power dissipation of 85 watts versus 70 watts for its predecessor KT150 and can do 300 watts in push-pull mode. Now, I have reviewed the Cayin CS150 a while ago, and I have to say the dynamics, the bass, and the power, well, that impressed me. I was expecting the KT170 to be more powerful, and yeah, that was about it. You see, I split tubes into three groups. Tubes that are low power but good for mid-range, namely the 300B, the 211, and the 845 tubes, and so forth. Now, for example, this 845 tube amp I have here has killer mid-range. My audio buddies and I call this amp the bird cage because, well, it looks like one. I say the cage looks like a shopping cart, actually, you find at supermarkets. Anyways, the next group is tubes that are pretty good for vocal, but with a bit more power, like EL34, KD66, EL84. Finally, some tubes excel more in dynamics, speed, power, and so forth. So now this is like KT88, 120, 150, and now 170. Of course, guys, I'm generalizing here, so cut me some slack. So when Richard, the Cayin distributor, reached out to me asking if I would like to give the Cayin Soul 170i a try, for sure I was curious, right? What can it bring to the table? The second I powered it up, I was surprised at the big leap in performance between the Cayin CS150, which uses KT150 tubes, to this Soul 170i, which uses KT170 tubes. Now let me pause for a moment, and I'll let you think about this. What could the Soul 170i possibly do better for me to consider it a big leap from the Cayin CS150? The reason I consider it a big improvement is not because it has more power and bass, which I bet many of you have guessed, but in the comments, what did you guess? The first second I power up the unit, the sparkling top end caught my attention. It was so refined that I knew, okay, I am listening to some serious high-end audio gear. Next, what took me by surprise the most is the velvet smooth mid-range. This is the big improvement I was talking about. Remember I said I usually look at 300B, 211, and 845 tubes for amazing mid-range? So I didn't expect KT170 to have a smooth and beautiful mid-range. I'm not saying the kind of mid-range that is rolled off, but rather the kind of mid-range where you have effortless power and it's just fluid. The other Cayin CS150 did not give me that feeling. My audio buddy, Mr. Jazz, also fell in love with the mid-range with the 170. When I used my Silverline Sonata, the upper mid-range bump is just perfect with the right amount of sharpness. Next, the bass, unlike the CS150, is not as linear, so there's a slight bump in the upper bass, giving that very muscular feel. I tell you, man, when you push the volume on this amp, it is effortless. It feels like a V12 engine. You have an excellent soundstage, very airy. Mr. Carver dropped by to listen to a few of my amps the other day. Now, I let him listen to all my two amps one by one, and I think it was after the Soul 170i that I let him listen to a $5,000 solid state integrated amp. He lost interest because he said, there's no air with solid state amps. The soundstage, although good with the $5,000 solid state amp, once you compare it to the Cayin 170i caliber, forget it, man. So if you're looking for a muscular amp with a lively top end and smooth mid-range, give the Cayin 170i a listen. 100% worth your time. So what about the negatives? Well, it's almost 40 kilograms. Oh, okay, some of you argue, oh, it's a positive, you know, the heavier the better. It's almost like you're paying by the pound. Interestingly, as I said, the amp is a bit lively, the classic Cayin sound. So my Asian audio buddies, Mr. Jazz, Mr. Kenta, and I love it, while my non-Asian audio buddies were not as head over heels over it as us. Now, don't get me wrong, they were still very impressed with it. I had this chat many times with many audiophiles and distributors, and I noticed this pattern. Most Asians tend to favor a more lively sound. My non-Asian buddies told me they could easily live with this amplifier because it has everything. They do wish it was a bit more musical though. But here's the thing, you can get it to sound a bit less lively and more musical if you change the 6SN7 tubes. So Mr. Kanta brought over these vintage Muller CV181 tubes made in England. They're like the real new old star, probably made before the cassette existed. If you're lucky enough to find a pair, it will cost you over $1,000. Crazy, but man, did it bring the amplifier to the next level. Smoother mid-range, yet still lively. More nuanced bass, and so comfortable to listen to. Now, I'm not saying go out and start bidding on eBay for a set of these Muller tubes, but keep in mind, you can fine-tune the sound by swapping out the 6SN7. My recommendation is if you have focal or bright speakers, don't buy this amp blind because it's a bit lively. Oh, I forgot to tell you what the Cayin Soul 170i is. The Cayin Soul 170i is the latest flagship tube integrated amp from Cayin. It outputs 130 watts in ultralinear mode and 75 watts in triad mode. A really beautiful design with an oversized volume knob and a tube cage that looks like it's made for, I don't know, velociraptors. The amplifier uses 4 KT170 power tubes, 2 ECC83S, 2 SN7, and a 22 DE42. The unit sounds smoother and softer in triad mode while more muscular in ultralinear mode. The amp will pass the Manapan torture test, and given it is selling through dealers here in Canada, it has proper after-sales support. No need to chase down customer service by email praying someone will answer you. The build quality definitely reflects its MSRP of $6,500 USD. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to try the Soul 170i is because I have these Apertura Edena speakers I have in for review. Now, this is a 10,000 plus speaker, and I remember being really impressed at the Montreal Audio Show, especially when it was driven by the Higo H390. Now, some days they were driven by the H190. So when I got the Edena back home and plugged it into my Mcintosh 6700, I was disappointed. Sounded nothing like what I heard. As you know, high-end audio takes a bit of work to get it to sound good. Partially it's because we tend to be less forgiving with more expensive gear. For the Edena, I brought in so many amplifiers to test. For example, the Higo 590, the Higo H300, the Synthesis Rona mono blocks, and many more, like expensive amps. Now, I found each amp brought out different strengths of these speakers. So I told Mr. Kanta the other day, I need something like a $20,000 amp to bring out the full potential of these speakers. This is a good thing because the bottleneck is not the speaker. Interestingly, out of all the amps I tried, the DIY amp that my audio buddy Mr. DIY made was probably the best sounding. But the problem is that if I brought that amp to market, it would cost 20 grand. So with that amp, you get the extended top end, buttery smooth mid-range, and nicely controlled bass. The Cayin 170i also did sound fantastic with the Apertura Edena. In fact, Mr. Kanta told me the other day that he was not impressed with the Edena until he heard it with the Cayin. The top end can extend really high. In fact, I remember one night I was even telling myself, man, these Edena with its ribbon tweeter can sparkle even better than my focal speakers. The Edena bass is incredibly rich and elastic. The 170i can bring out the richness of the Edena's bass, and of course the Cayin 170 smooth mid-range sounded really good with the Edena. Sure, I wish the Cayin bass can go deeper, but there's a subwoofer out so you can have that full experience if you wish. Now keep in mind, the Edena are not easy to drive, but the 170i drove it with no problem. Mr. Quad thought the Cayin sounded better than the Mcintosh when paired with the Edena. Now, while we are on the topic of the Apertura Edena speakers, they can really scale up and sound good if you have the right gear to match them. Like most high-end gear, it is not simply just plug and play. For example, I had to put these special feet on it to improve the bass. With those feet, the sound sounded more balanced. The cables I used, yeah, I had to try different ones to get the perfect one. However, when you get it right, man, it is a very balanced presentation that you can listen to for many hours. It's not one of those speakers that catch your attention in the first 30 seconds, which can be considered a good thing. Speakers that blow you away right away, for me, is usually a red flag. So give the Edena a try, but ask them not to pair it with Mcintosh. If you like to listen to music with a lot of instruments, like orchestra, these Edena are pretty good for it. I spend most of my time listening to instruments with these speakers. Now, before you rush out to buy KT170 tubes, just because your amp can quote-unquote support KT170 tubes, think twice. One thing my audio buddies and I have noticed is just because an amplifier says it can use the tubes, it does not mean it will sound good with those tubes. Now, I'm not an engineer and a designer, but I'm guessing it is because of the voltage. If you run the voltage low on your amplifier, you can use tubes that are higher voltage with no problem. Sure, the tubes will last longer. However, if you're not running the tubes at optimal voltage, I don't think you will get optimal performance out of it. That is why some amplifiers I tested sounded amazing with EL34, but sounded like crap with KT88, although it says it supports KT88. Now I'm going to assume the Cayin 170i voltage has been reasonably optimized for KT170. That is why the fluidity and the power are just spectacular. Now I'm not saying what I just said is right, since I don't know amplifier design, but it is something we notice playing with many amplifiers and with tube rolling. So with that, let me wrap it up before going into the bonus section. I'm going to steal a page from Sean at Zero Fidelity by finishing the video with a bonus section, because that is where I'll tell you a story about how the Cayin 170i inspired the Gallion TS120. Not all of you want to hear about the TS120, and I understand. The Cayin 170i and the Wilsonton R300 that I recently got had me re-evaluating what I should expect from tubes. The Wilsonton R300 uses 300B, and you know, 300B has no bass. You buy it for the mid-range, but as you know, things improve, and I can say the Wilsonton R300 with its wimpy 8 watt would destroy many tube amplifiers on the market in terms of bass. This completely changed my view on low power amps. The Cayin 170i, as I said, the mid-range sounded so good that it can rival many amplifiers that uses tubes that are good for vocal. Even die-hard 845 300B fans, I think the mid-range of this 170i might satisfy some of you. This is good because we're at a stage in time where we have a lot more choices with incredible performing gear, whether it be high-end or affordable. So with that, I will end the video and see you next time. Now, for those who want to stay and listen to my story as how this Cayin 170i has influenced how I voice the TS120, stick around. I'm not going to compare the TS120 to the 170i because that would be like comparing my kid to someone else's kid. My kid wins by default, period. Okay, so at one point in the last few months, I was only listening to the TS120 because I was voicing it. At the time, I was focused on making it sound smooth, and I succeeded to some extent. The problem is I was living in the TS120 bubble because all I listened to is the TS120. I thought it sounded great. The first day I powered up the 170i, I wanted to cry. The top end sparkling detail was so beautiful that I wanted to throw the TS120 in the garbage. Remember, I was trying to make the TS120 sound smooth. Sure, I did it, but I killed the top end sparkling detail. Okay, it still sounded good, but as the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. Refinement. Most amps today are refined enough, but the difference between high-end and just good is really 5%. Remember that video I made on the Gallion and the Wilson Sabrina speakers on my other Gallion channel? The owner and I had a chat about sparkling detail, and I loved the way he described it. Now keep in mind his system is over 60 grand, so his view of sparkling detail is on that caliber. See, in some system, when you hear sparkling detail, it is like looking at a night sky in the city, each star representing a sparkle. And as you know, in the city, you don't see that many stars. In a high-end system, it is like you went out of the city, go to the top of the mountain, and you see the Milky Way galactic center with billions of stars. Have you ever seen a night sky near the equator on top of a mountain away from light and air pollution, I have billions of stars. Until you see it, it is hard to imagine. People always ask me, what can high-end audio do that budget audio cannot? That sparkling top-end refinement in a high-end system is simply another level up. So when I heard the Cayin 170i sparkling top-end, it was a wake-up call for me that I need to do better. I need to make the amp smooth while allowing it to sparkle like no tomorrow. I need to fix the upper mid-range instead of touching the treble. The point was the Cayin 170i was so much to my taste that it smacked me silly on my head. Thomas, you think your kit is good? Let me show you what good is. During that time, although I say I was only listening to TS120, well, there were times when I would listen to other amps, and none of them gave me that wake-up call because, their top-end sparkling was not better than the TS120. Only the Cayin 170i gave me that oh shit moment. For those of you who pre-ordered TS120, don't worry, I've succeeded to get the TS120 to where I wanted it to be and beyond. So that is the story I wanted to share. Till next time.
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been found. My cause is not defined. Won't you kiss me? Won't you play? Won't you drive me? Ain't no way I could deny you, I could strive. Won't you kiss me? Ain't no way. Won't you? Come and try me now, come and try me now. I will never live. I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been found. My cause is not defined.